Who are you sketching? Part A. Sarah's Architectural Solitude and the Visual Filter. The fourth period art room at Middleton Middle School was Sarah Jones's most reliable sanctuary, a space of focused intent where the transient demands of adolescent social dynamics receded entirely. It was a haven built of high ceilings, the comforting scent of wet clay, and the silent promise of creative concentration. Here, nestled at a worn wooden table in the back corner, Sarah could finally access the deepest channels of her artistic consciousness. Sarah was a girl of quiet, subtle beauty, with hair the color of midnight and eyes that often retreated behind a carefully maintained curtain of long, hesitant bangs. Her demeanor was not one of timidity, but of deep introversion, a necessary protective layer that allowed her to observe the world with the precision required for her craft. She moved through the crowded school hallways like a conscientious ghost, preferring the company of deliberate observation to the jarring reality of casual, loud interaction. Sarah was deeply sensitive to nuance, highly attuned to the unspoken language of form and shadow, and she found the fleeting demands of middle school social games too low resolution for her creative energy. Other students spoke in loud bursts of confidence about fashion, music, and the immediate concerns of the day. Sarah spoke almost exclusively in the language of charcoal and pencil. It was a communication protocol she fully trusted, precise, visible, and enduring. Her peers, particularly Maya and Chloe, sometimes noted her preference for solitude. They sometimes referred to her as Shadow, not with malice, but with a slight, clumsy lack of understanding for her need for space. Their attempts at playful interaction often missed the mark, resulting in brief, awkward moments where Sarah's inability to shift instantly from observation to small talk was misinterpreted as something else. She merely regarded these interactions as social misalignment, minor friction points that were easily filtered out once she returned to the stability of her sketchbook. Her sketchbook was the true map of her internal world. It was thick with complex studies of texture and light, the precise aging pattern of brickwork on the school's oldest wing, the tangled complexity of a thicket of winter branches, the way sunlight refracted through the dust motes suspended in the art room air. She drew things that were stable, enduring, and structurally honest. She focused on the world's quiet geometry, the underlying truth that was often obscured by human noise. The human face, with its fleeting, unreliable expressions, was far too variable a subject. Sarah preferred the predictable integrity of architecture. Her current project was an ambitious study of the old church tower visible from the art room window. She was captivated by the sheer weight of its history, the way the stone absorbed the light, and the perfect, measured logic of its engineering. She loved the feel of charcoal on the paper, the dry, smooth resistance, and the way a single stick could capture the darkness of a deep recess or the softest gray of reflected light. Her drawing was not merely a reproduction, it was an act of translation, taking the three-dimensional solidity of the structure and rendering its essence into 2 dimensions. Sarah's long bangs were an essential tool in this process, a visual filter. They allowed her to selectively perceive the world, blurring the edges of distracting motion and isolating the critical details she needed to capture. When she drew, the world narrowed to the page, the pencil, and the pure intention of her eye. She was not hiding, she was focusing. This level of sustained concentration was her peace, her internal architecture, and her defense against the low-frequency static of the exterior world. She had noticed Edward a few tables away. Edward was another student defined by a singular, intense focus. He was rarely seen without a pencil in his hand, moving with the quiet, deliberate grace of someone whose mind was always engaged in a meticulous task. She knew him vaguely from history class. He was the one who could always offer an unexpectedly insightful, structurally sound answer that cut through the vagueness of general discussion. Like her, Edward seemed to operate on a higher, more precise frequency. He, too, appreciated integrity of form. Sarah found herself occasionally studying his hands, the long, elegant fingers that gripped his drawing tools with such controlled intention. They moved with a delicate power, shifting seamlessly between a broad, confident stroke and a minute, almost surgical application of lead. She noticed the slight indentations of the pencil's wood against his index finger, the gentle tension in his wrist. It was a study in applied focus, a kinetic geometry she found profoundly satisfying. One afternoon, she made a few quick, almost invisible sketches of his working hand, framing it perfectly against the rough texture of the wooden table. It was an exercise in drawing intention. Edward, however, drew faces. Sarah had glimpsed his work, not caricature or portraiture, but character studies. He captured the subtle shift in a jawline, the specific tilt of a chin when a person was deep in thought, the unique geometry of an ear. His work was about the internal state made visible, and Sarah admired the courage it took to approach such a variable, high-risk subject. She felt a quiet, intellectual bond with him, a shared acknowledgement that the art room was a sacred space for the serious pursuit of truth. The presence of Edward in the art room was a stable element in her personal geometry. He was a silent companion in focus, a witness to her dedication, and a fellow traveler on the quiet path of artistic discipline. Their silence was not empty. It was a rich, shared commitment to creation. Part 2. Edward's Quest for Essential Form and the Detail Analyst. Edward Thompson approached the world not with hesitation, but with the detailed scrutiny of a detail analyst. He processed human interaction like complex data streams, finding the noise often overwhelming and the essential truth surprisingly rare. Therefore, he preferred to spend his time in the art room, where the data, the visual information, was stable, controllable, and subject to meticulous rendering. Edward's artistic mission was the quest for essential form. He believed that beneath the surface of fleeting expression and transient emotion lay a permanent core geometry, the unique structural truth of every individual face. He drew people not as they wished to be seen, but as they essentially were when they were completely unself-conscious. He was searching for the inner geometry of the human spirit. His sketchbook was filled with focused, isolated studies, the perfect symmetry of a sleeping face, the intense, specific concentration around an eye when reading, the relaxed, asymmetrical set of a mouth when a person was lost in thought. He didn't chase realism, he sought precision of essence. He had noticed Sarah Jones from the moment she chose her corner. He appreciated her immediate, profound commitment to the space. She brought an air of absolute stillness and dedication that perfectly complemented his own. She was not merely a student in the room, she was an architect of quiet observation. Edward had, for weeks, dedicated his primary drawing time to a single continuous study, the profile of Sarah Jones when she was drawing the church tower. It was a challenge of sustained, focused appreciation. He wasn't drawing Sarah the person who navigated the hallways. He was drawing the Sarah of pure intent. When she was drawing, her long, dark bangs served as the perfect frame, creating a striking contrast with the pale, concentrated clarity of her skin. The line of her nose, the slight upward tilt of her chin, and the perfect, delicate curve of her neck became for Edward the most beautiful, intricate piece of organic architecture he had ever encountered. It was a study in stillness, a profound visual essay on the power of focus. He found immense joy in the quiet, sustained observation. He would observe the way the light caught the wisps of hair near her ear, creating a subtle halo of silver. He noted the precise moment her brow furrowed in concentration, not in distress, but in the effort of perfect visual translation. Every detail was captured with a specific, loving precision. He used a graphite pencil of 2H hardness, allowing him to layer the tones until they achieved a soft, almost luminous quality. The rendering was slow, careful, and imbued with an immense, quiet respect. He was, in effect, drawing his admiration. In the louder, more scattered environment of the hallway, Edward also experienced the frequent social misalignment. Students often mistook his quietness for aloofness. When Maya and Chloe would pass Sarah and comment on her shadowy presence, Edward would feel a dull ache of misunderstanding. He knew they weren't trying to cause harm, but their low-resolution focus was disruptive. They failed to appreciate that Sarah's quietness was not a deficiency, but a necessary condition for her brilliance. He often considered the difference between surface noise, the chatter, the gossip, the casual social commentary, and subtle truth. The steady rhythm of Sarah's breathing as she drew, the unwavering intent in her eyes, the structural perfection of her profile. He made a conscious, daily choice to filter out the noise and immerse himself in the truth. One afternoon, Edward was working on the delicate shading of the shadow cast by Sarah's glasses on her cheek. He needed a specific, almost impossible softness, a blending that required an extremely fine, almost invisible stroke. He didn't have the right tool. He subtly glanced at Sarah's desk and saw she had a specialized paper stump perfectly sharpened for delicate blending. He hesitated, recognizing the social hurdle of breaking the quiet. But the necessity of artistic integrity overruled the social barrier. He quietly reached over to her table, careful not to disturb her concentration. He placed his open pencil case on the edge of her workspace and slid a silent, small note across the table. "May I borrow the paper stump? Need to execute a delicate gradient, returning immediately." Sarah didn't look up. Her concentration remained absolute. She simply extended her hand, picked up the note, read it, and without a word, slid the stump into his case. The transaction was a shared language protocol, a seamless, nonverbal communication based entirely on mutual artistic need. Edward felt a profound wave of connection. She understood. He returned the stump 5 minutes later, perfectly clean and resting on a small square of blotting paper. It was his small, silent acknowledgement of her generosity and his respect for her tools. This quiet exchange became a touchstone for their shared, silent commitment. He knew that this drawing of Sarah was more than just a piece of art. It was a record of the most intense, pure form of recognition he had ever achieved. The pencil, his hand, and Sarah's concentrated form were all converging into a single, beautiful, structural analysis of human dedication. He intended to show her, but the timing had to be perfect. The revelation needed to be as gentle and structurally sound as the drawing itself. Part 3. The Unspoken Dialogue and the Shared Language Protocol. Their unspoken dialogue grew richer in the ensuing weeks. It was a communication built on subtle adjustments and silent acknowledgments of shared aesthetic priorities. The art room itself became a quiet amplifier for their creative synchronicity. Edward noticed, for example, that when he started working with the rougher texture of vine charcoal, Sarah immediately shifted her architectural studies from fine line work to broader, more atmospheric rendering, seemingly inspired by the freedom of his medium. Conversely, when Sarah spent an entire session obsessively refining the texture of the old wooden floorboards, Edward's own portraiture immediately gained a new level of detail in the rendering of clothing fabric and hair, mimicking her deep commitment to texture. They were two silent tuning forks, vibrating in perfect artistic resonance. Their shared routine established a comforting rhythm. Edward would arrive precisely at 1:17 p.m., 3 minutes before the bell, and always set up his tools in the exact same configuration. Sarah would arrive at 1:20 p.m., setting down her worn leather satchel with a soft thump that Edward had come to anticipate. Their pencils would scratch against the paper, the only persistent sound besides the gentle hiss of the radiator and the distant, muffled sound of the history teacher's voice down the hall. One day, Sarah's charcoal stick snapped under too much pressure while she was defining the deep shadow in the church tower's bell recess. She sighed, a very quiet, almost inaudible sound of frustration. Edward, without looking up from his sustained study of her profile, gently pushed a small, perfectly sharpened, tough stuff eraser stick across the table. It was the best kind for lifting charcoal and graphite without damaging the paper's tooth. They were two silent tuning forks vibrating in perfect artistic resonance. Sarah looked at the eraser, a soft, warm feeling spreading through her chest. It wasn't pity or intrusion, it was preemptive understanding. Edward had anticipated her need and offered the precise technical solution. She used the eraser to seamlessly correct her line, then quietly slipped the tool into his pencil case when she was finished. The unspoken exchange affirmed their deep, technical rapport. Sarah continued her study of Edward's hands. She moved from the simple, static study of his grip to the kinetic geometry of his movement. She drew his hand as it reached for a blending tool, as it paused in midair to assess a shade, and as it rested, fingers curled upon the edge of the table. She saw his hands as instruments of controlled power, elegant in their restraint and precise in their action. Through these detailed studies, Sarah felt she was understanding Edward's process, his commitment to perfection, his methodical patience. She was tracing the architecture of his internal world through the visible evidence of his craft. Meanwhile, Edward was nearing the completion of his most significant portrait of Sarah. He had titled the piece internally, "The Observer in Stillness." He wasn't just drawing a girl, he was documenting a spiritual state. He had carefully rendered the soft, diffuse light that filtered through the art room's high windows, creating a subtle contrast between the shadowed side of her face, the filter, and the side illuminated by the creative process, the clarity. He even captured the tiny, subtle indentations on her temple left by her glasses, a detail that spoke to his intense, focused dedication. He realized he was in love. Not with a superficial, noisy adolescent infatuation, but with the quiet, profound commitment of her artistic soul. His love was a structural commitment based entirely on the verified data of her character, her discipline, her visual integrity, and her profound stillness. He knew that for their relationship to work, the revelation had to be in their shared language. It couldn't be a verbal declaration. It had to be an exchange of tangible truth. The moment arrived during a history lesson. Mr. Harrison was droning on about 19th century European treaties, a subject that offered Edward ample time for meticulous thought. Edward looked across the room at Sarah, who was taking careful, precise notes, her expression entirely focused. He watched as she paused, slightly tilted her head, and made a small, quick adjustment to the framing of her paper. It was the same gesture he made before beginning a particularly challenging section of a drawing. He realized the time was right. It wasn't the end of the day or a special event. It was a moment of perfect synchronicity within the mundane. He wrote another note, simple and precise, the graphite pressed firmly against the paper. "I'm documenting the geometry of your focus. May I share the analysis?" He didn't use the word sketch. He used the vocabulary of their shared intellectual world: geometry, focus, analysis. He folded the paper twice and waited until Mr. Harrison turned to the whiteboard. He then walked the note over, placing it gently on the corner of Sarah's desk. He returned to his seat, not anxious, but filled with the quiet certainty of a complex calculation finally solved. He knew the answer, whatever it was, would be honest. Sarah opened the note, her expression remaining perfectly level. She read the words, and a subtle warmth spread from her chest outward, a feeling of deep, profound recognition. Edward had seen her, not the shadow, but the architect. She smiled, the faintest, most genuine curve of her lips. She wrote her reply on the back of his note. "I have been documenting the kinetic geometry of your intention. Protocol accepted." Part 4. The Gentle Convergence and the Revealed Analysis. The agreed-upon time for the exchange was the end of the next art class. "Edward," Sarah said softly, using his name aloud for the first time, but Edward and Sarah remained seated at their tables, two anchors of stillness in the room. "Edward," Sarah said softly, using his name aloud for the first time. Her voice was quiet, steady, and melodious, a perfect pitch of quiet confidence. Edward stood and walked over to her table. He carried his sketchbook reverently, placing it between them like a sacred text. Sarah did the same. The air was thick with anticipation and trust. Edward opened his book first, flipping directly to the portrait, The Observer in Stillness. It was breathtaking in its detail and its commitment to her essence. The drawing was framed so that her face occupied the entire space, her profile rendered with a mastery that conveyed not just her features, but the sheer intensity of her creative drive. The light was perfect, the shadows subtle, and the focus of her eye, though unseen behind the lens of her glasses, felt palpable. Sarah took a deep, steady breath. She reached out and gently traced the line of her own jaw, perfectly captured in graphite. It was an overwhelming feeling of being seen, truly seen, for the first time. "You captured the angle of my neck perfectly," she whispered, her voice husky with emotion. "When I'm drawing, I forget that physical anchor exists. You documented my structural commitment." "It's the most beautiful form of concentration I've ever analyzed," Edward replied, his voice equally soft and steady. "The light and shadow around your visual filter, your bangs, create a fascinating contrast. It wasn't a drawing of a girl. It was a study of pure focus." Then it was Sarah's turn. She opened her sketchbook, flipping past her architectural studies to the pages dedicated to Edward. She showed him the various sketches, culminating in the most recent, a dynamic study of his hand resting, fingers slightly curved, after a particularly long bout of drawing. She had also included a small, precise self-portrait she had sketched in their mutual history class, catching the small, unique freckle under his right eye that was so easily missed. Edward looked at the detailed, kinetic study of his working hand. He recognized the effort and the respect in the lines. Sarah hadn't been interested in his status or his social persona. She had been interested in his functional grace as an artist. And then he saw the final image, the self-portrait, rendered with a light, almost reverent touch. "I love how you captured the small freckle under my right eye that no one else ever notices," Edward responded, gently tracing the line of his drawing. It was the most intimate detail he owned, and she had recognized its precise location and rendered it with a quiet confidence. "It's a point of unique, specific geometry," Sarah explained. "It anchors the light reflection perfectly. It is essential to your form." Their exchange was the successful conclusion of a shared artistic process. Their love story, born in the quiet corners of a middle school and written in the dark strokes of charcoal, felt inevitable and structurally sound. It was a testament to the powerful, magnetic force of mutual recognition, a beautiful, quiet destiny designed by two souls operating on the same frequency. They closed their sketchbooks simultaneously, sealing their shared secret and the profound depth of their connection. They stood up together, their arms brushing, a warm, soft thrill passing between them, a silent electric agreement on their shared language glungapal. "So," Edward asked, his deep green eyes finally meeting hers, a genuine smile radiating quiet confidence. "Now that we've confirmed our mutual subjects and shared analysis, do we still need the visual filter?" Sarah laughed, a soft, beautiful sound that surprised even herself, a sound of complete, acknowledged freedom. She gently pushed her long bangs back from her face, revealing the full, clear focus of her eyes for the first time. She looked out at the busy hallway beyond the art room door, the sound, the crowds, the rushing tide of teenage life. It didn't feel chaotic or frightening anymore. It was just ambient noise, easily navigated. "Not anymore," she said, finally raising her head. "I think we can go face the rest of the school now. Our structural integrity is confirmed." Part V, the masterpiece of mutual design. The final weeks of middle school passed with a quiet, profound transformation in Sarah and Edward. They walked the hall side by side, no longer seeking refuge, but simply enjoying the confirmed presence of a partner who truly understood their core essence. Sarah had relaxed her visual filter, allowing her eyes to meet the world with a clarity born of internal security. Edward moved with an even greater sense of purpose. His detailed observation now extended to their shared environment, analyzing opportunities for future projects. Their conversations, once primarily nonverbal, were now rich, soft dialogues about their collaborative architectural vision. They spoke of high school not as a challenge to be endured, but as a new, larger canvas for their joint creation. Edward spoke of developing a complex art installation focused on the architecture of human movement. He wanted to create a series of charcoal studies that captured the fleeting, beautiful geometry of bodies in motion. A dancer's poised balance, the purposeful stride of an athlete, the subtle lean of a friend telling a secret. "I want to use multiple panels," he explained to Sarah one afternoon over lunch, carefully measuring the space between his water bottle and his sandwich, a habit of constant geometric assessment. Each panel would show a different phase of the movement, like frames in a film, but all integrated into a single cohesive form. "It's about documenting the kinetics of intention." Sarah was captivated. "And I could supply the texture," she proposed, her eyes bright with creative energy. "I could focus on the surface rendering, the way light hits the fabric, the subtle wrinkles in the skin, the granular texture of the floor. My structural analysis would provide the material honesty for your kinetic flow." They were no longer just sketching, they were designing a future. Their plans coalesced into a dream of attending a specialized high school for the arts and, eventually, collaborating on a design firm, where Edward would focus on human-centered architecture, designing spaces that maximized human comfort and focus, and Sarah would lead the visual communication, rendering the concepts with profound emotional honesty. Edward, ever the detail analyst, spent hours observing Sarah in their new phase of openness. He saw the subtle, confident shift in her posture, the way she now carried her sketchbook not as a shield, but as a tool of confirmed purpose. He began a new private series of sketches, The Partner in Clarity. These drawings focused on her eyes that were now fully revealed and engaged, radiating the quiet power of an accepted destiny. He captured the specific way she would look at him across a classroom, a look that was a complex fusion of intellectual respect and gentle affection, a gaze that confirmed the structural integrity of his entire world. Sarah, in turn, focused her art on the geometry of commitment. She drew Edward's profile as he was speaking, capturing the intense, dedicated concentration of his thought process. She saw the powerful, gentle discipline in his features. She started a large abstract piece on canvas, using only charcoal dust and subtle white chalk highlights, attempting to capture the feeling of their shared silence, the rich, resonant space of mutual understanding. The piece was titled Resonance. One day, Maya and Chloe approached them in the hallway. The interaction was, as always, characterized by awkward social misalignment, but this time, Sarah and Edward stood firm together. "Hey, Sarah," Maya began, attempting a casual connection. "Wow, you actually cut your bangs. They look different." Edward stepped subtly closer to Sarah, his physical presence a quiet, unyielding boundary. Sarah smiled softly, a genuine, calm smile. "Thank you, Maya," Sarah replied, her voice steady and clear. "I've updated my visual filter. I found the high-resolution setting provides better clarity for my current projects." Chloe and Maya exchanged a confused glance, entirely missing the technical and emotional metaphor. The conversation dissolved quickly, as it always did when faced with genuine depth. Edward took Sarah's hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, a simple, public confirmation of their dual entity. They walked away, leaving the low-frequency static behind them. Their last day in the art room was a moment of profound, quiet ceremony. They packed their tools, carefully wrapping their favorite charcoal sticks and their most cherished, softest erasers. They looked at the worn wooden table, the light falling across it in the familiar, comforting way. "This room," Edward murmured, "is where we established the first principle of our life."
The principle of mutual recognition, Sarah confirmed, slipping her finished resonance canvas into its protective sleeve. They walked out of Middleton Middle School that afternoon, not as two quiet, isolated students, but as two artists who had found their voice, their purpose, and their love in silence. They were ready to navigate the world side by side, their future already drafted, detailed, and affirmed.
Their new beginning was quiet, honest, and utterly, beautifully fated. A masterpiece of mutual design that had finally moved from the pages of their sketchbooks to the expansive, shared reality of their young, principled lives. The architecture of their future was sound, built on the steady, unshakable foundation of their deep, quiet love.